The clock had just struck 11 p.m. when Michelle Thompson pulled out of the courthouse parking lot, her mind still racing from the case files she'd been reviewing. As one of the city's most dedicated civil rights attorneys, late nights were nothing new to her. The streetlights cast a gentle glow on her dark blue sedan as she drove through the quiet downtown streets, heading home to finally get some rest. The sweet melody of jazz filled her car as she hummed along, thinking about tomorrow's court appearance. She had spent countless hours preparing to defend a young man who had faced similar discrimination that she'd seen far too often in her 10 years of practice. Her dashboard clock blinked 11:23 p.m. when the sudden flash of red and blue lights in her rearview mirror jolted her from her thoughts. Michelle checked her speedometer. She had been going exactly at the speed limit. Years of experience representing clients in police misconduct cases had taught her to always be careful, especially during late-night drives. She took a deep breath and pulled over to the side of the road, making sure to position her car under a street light for better visibility. Following the safety protocol she had advised countless clients about, Michelle turned on her interior lights, placed both hands visible on the steering wheel, and reached slowly to turn down her music. Through her side mirror, she watched as the police officer emerged from his patrol car. Even from this distance, she could see his hand already resting on his weapon, a detail that made her heart skip a beat. Officer Robert Wilson approached her vehicle with heavy footsteps that seemed unnecessarily aggressive for a simple traffic stop. Michelle's legal instincts kicked in as she noticed his body language, tense shoulders, stern face, and a grip on his weapon that appeared more suited for approaching a dangerous suspect than a professional woman in business attire. "License and registration," he barked, his flashlight beam intentionally aimed to blind her, despite the well-lit street and her already illuminated car interior. The registration and insurance papers were clearly displayed on her windshield, making his aggressive demand seem even more unnecessary. Michelle kept her voice steady and professional. "Good evening, officer. My registration and insurance are displayed on the windshield, and I'll slowly reach for my license in my purse on the passenger seat." She narrated her movements clearly, just as she had taught her clients to do. The officer's response sent chills down her spine. "Just hurry up and don't try anything funny," he snapped, his tone dripping with unwarranted hostility. As she reached for her purse, Michelle noticed him tighten his grip on his weapon. Drawing from years of experience in similar situations, both personal and professional, Michelle discreetly pressed the button on her dashboard camera. Another safety measure she had installed after hearing too many similar stories from her clients. She then reached for her phone, placing it on the dashboard with its camera facing the driver's window. Officer Wilson's demeanor shifted noticeably when he saw her professional legal credentials. His eyes narrowed and his jaw clenched, a reaction Michelle had seen countless times when authority figures realized they were dealing with someone who knew their rights. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered, his voice carrying an edge that seemed to slice through the night air. Michelle's mind raced as she assessed the situation. This was no longer about a simple traffic stop, if it ever had been. She could feel the weight of the moment, knowing that what happened next would matter not just for her, but for every person who had ever faced similar discrimination. The street remained eerily quiet, with only the distant sound of traffic and the humming of her car's engine breaking the tension. Michelle's hands remained steady on the wheel as she prepared herself for what was coming next. Her years of fighting for justice in the courtroom had prepared her for this moment, though she never thought she'd be on this side of the story. "Officer," she began calmly, her voice carrying the same strength she used in court, "I'd like to know the reason for this stop, and I'm exercising my right to record this interaction." The dashboard camera continued recording silently, capturing every word, every movement, and every micro-expression that would later prove crucial in what was about to unfold. This was just the beginning of a night that would change not only Michelle's life, but would spark a movement that would ripple through the entire community. Unknown to both of them, this seemingly routine traffic stop was about to become a turning point in the ongoing fight for justice and equality in law enforcement. The tension in the air grew thicker as Officer Wilson's flashlight beam continued to shine directly into Michelle's eyes. She could feel her heart pounding, but her voice remained steady as she repeated her question about the reason for the stop. The years she'd spent in courtrooms had taught her how to maintain composure under pressure, and now those skills were being put to the ultimate test. "You changed lanes without signaling," Officer Wilson claimed, though both of them knew this wasn't true. Michelle had been especially careful with her driving, knowing all too well how late-night traffic stops could go wrong. She had signaled every turn, maintained the speed limit, and followed every traffic rule to the letter. "Officer, I respectfully disagree," Michelle responded, her tone professional but firm. "My dashboard camera has recorded my entire journey, and I signaled all my lane changes." She noticed his expression darken at the mention of the camera, his fingers drumming against his belt in a way that made her increasingly uneasy. The radio on Officer Wilson's shoulder crackled with static, breaking the tense silence. He ignored it, instead leaning closer to her window. "Listen here," he said, his voice dropping to a threatening whisper. "I don't care what kind of fancy lawyer you are. When I said you did something wrong, you did something wrong." Michelle felt a chill run down her spine, but she drew strength from every client she'd ever represented who had faced similar intimidation. Her phone continued recording as she replied, "I understand you're doing your job, officer, but I'm also doing mine by exercising my rights as a citizen." The street remained deserted, with only the occasional car passing by, their headlights briefly illuminating the scene before disappearing into the night. A few raindrops began to fall, creating a soft pitter-patter on the car roof that contrasted sharply with the growing hostility of the situation. "Step out of the vehicle," Officer Wilson demanded again, this time unclipping his holster. A clearly unnecessary action that sent Michelle's legal mind into high alert. She knew this was a critical moment. Every decision she made now would have consequences. "Officer," she said clearly, making sure her words were captured by both recording devices, "I don't feel safe stepping out of the vehicle. I've identified myself, provided my documentation, and I'm not legally required to exit the vehicle without probable cause. If you have concerns, I'd be happy to discuss them with your supervisor present." Her mention of a supervisor seemed to strike a nerve. Officer Wilson's face contorted with anger as he spat out, "You people always think you know the law better than everyone else. Always trying to tell me how to do my job." The racial undertone in his words was unmistakable, and Michelle felt a familiar mix of sadness and determination. This was exactly why she had chosen her career path, why she spent countless hours helping others fight against such discrimination. Now she found herself living through the very scenario she had helped so many others navigate. Through the patrol car's windshield, Michelle could see the dashboard computer glowing. She knew her license check would show a spotless record, her bar certification, and her work as a civil rights attorney. This knowledge seemed to be dawning on Officer Wilson too, as his behavior grew increasingly agitated. The rain was falling harder now, but neither of them seemed to notice. Officer Wilson's flashlight beam wavered as he shifted his stance, his authority visibly challenged by Michelle's calm assertion of her rights. "Last chance," he growled. "Step out of the vehicle, or things are going to get a lot worse for you." Michelle's fingers gripped the steering wheel tighter, her knuckles turning white. She thought about every client who had sat in her office, sharing similar stories of intimidation and abuse of power. She thought about her parents, who had taught her to stand up for what was right, even when it was scary. She thought about her younger sister, who looked up to her as a role model. "Officer Wilson," she said, her voice carrying the weight of every case she'd ever fought, every injustice she'd ever challenged, "I am recording this interaction. I've identified myself, and I am not legally required to exit my vehicle without probable cause. If you continue this behavior, I will be forced to file a formal complaint. Now, I would like to speak with your supervisor." The words hung in the rain-filled air between them, marking a point of no return. What happened next would change not only their lives but would become a catalyst for change in the entire community. The dashboard camera continued recording silently, capturing every second of what was about to become one of the most significant traffic stops in the city's history. Time seemed to slow down as Officer Wilson processed Michelle's request for a supervisor. The raindrops caught the red and blue lights, creating an almost surreal atmosphere around them. For a moment, the only sound was the gentle drumming of rain on metal and the distant whisper of passing cars. Michelle's phone continued recording steadily on the dashboard, its small red light a quiet reminder of the documentation taking place. Her years of legal experience had taught her the vital importance of evidence, but she never imagined she'd be gathering it from the driver's seat of her own car. Suddenly, Officer Wilson's demeanor shifted. His face hardened, and without warning, he reached through her car window. "That's enough of your recording," he snapped, his arm shooting toward her phone. Michelle instinctively leaned back, but in doing so, her elbow accidentally honked the horn, sending a sharp blast into the quiet night. The unexpected noise seemed to further agitate the officer. In his aggressive reach for the phone, his arm struck Michelle's shoulder with considerable force. The impact knocked her glasses askew, but she managed to maintain her composure, speaking clearly for the cameras. "Officer, you just struck me. This is now assault." "You're interfering with a police investigation," Officer Wilson shouted, his voice echoing off the empty buildings around them. But Michelle noticed his hand had withdrawn slightly at her mention of assault. Her legal mind was already cataloging every detail, every word, every action. Through her slightly crooked glasses, Michelle could see a second set of police lights approaching in her rearview mirror. Her heart lifted slightly. Maybe this was the supervisor she'd requested. She kept her hands visible on the steering wheel, her voice steady as she announced, "I'm staying still and keeping my hands where you can see them, but I want to be clear that I'm not consenting to any searches or seizures." Officer Wilson's partner, a younger officer named Chen, jogged up to the scene. He took in the situation, the running cameras, Michelle's professional appearance, and his partner's aggressive stance, with visible concern. "Everything okay here?" he asked, his eyes darting between them. "This woman is being uncooperative," Officer Wilson began, but Michelle calmly interrupted, addressing Officer Chen directly. "I've been assaulted by your partner while exercising my legal right to record this interaction. I'm a civil rights attorney, and I've requested a supervisor." The rain was falling harder now, but no one seemed to notice. Officer Chen's arrival had shifted the dynamic, and Michelle could see Officer Wilson's confidence wavering. The younger officer maintained a professional distance, his hand nowhere near his weapon, a stark contrast to his partner's aggressive posture. "I've got dash cam footage of everything," Michelle continued, her voice carrying the same authority she used in courtrooms, including Officer Wilson's unnecessary use of force and his attempt to seize my property without cause. More patrol cars were arriving now, their lights painting the wet street in swirling patterns of red and blue. Michelle recognized several of the officers from her courthouse work, and she could see the recognition dawn on their faces as well. The situation was quickly becoming larger than Officer Wilson had anticipated. A sergeant's car pulled up, and Michelle felt a small surge of relief. She'd worked with Sergeant Rivera on several community outreach programs, and she knew her reputation for fairness. As the sergeant approached, Michelle could see Officer Wilson's demeanor changing, the realization of his serious error finally setting in. "Ms. Thompson," Sergeant Rivera called out, approaching the car with a professional but concerned expression. "Are you all right? Officer Chen called for me specifically when he recognized you." "I'd like to file a formal complaint," Michelle responded, her voice unwavering. "And I have everything on camera." She gestured to both her phone and the dashboard camera, still faithfully recording every moment of the encounter. The night air was thick with tension as Sergeant Rivera took control of the scene. Other officers began taking statements from witnesses who had stopped when they saw the growing police presence. Michelle noticed several bystanders had their phones out, recording the scene, more evidence of what had transpired. What had started as a routine traffic stop had transformed into something much more significant. As Michelle sat in her car, surrounded by police lights and the steady fall of rain, she knew this incident would become more than just another case file. This would be a turning point, a moment that would spark real change in how law enforcement interacted with the community they were sworn to protect. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. The quiet street had transformed into a scene of focused police work, with officers taking statements and photographs under the steady drizzle. Michelle sat in her car, maintaining her composure while Sergeant Rivera coordinated the investigation. Her shoulder ached where Officer Wilson had struck her, but her determination remained unshaken. "We'll need you to give a formal statement," Sergeant Rivera said, her professional demeanor a welcome contrast to the earlier hostility. "Would you prefer to do this at the station, or would you be more comfortable at your office?" The sergeant's consideration wasn't lost on Michelle. It was exactly the kind of respectful police work she'd been advocating for throughout her career. "My office would be better," Michelle replied, carefully gathering her phone and checking that both recordings had saved properly. "I'll need to contact my legal team anyway." She noticed Officer Wilson standing by his patrol car, looking considerably less confident as he spoke with what appeared to be an internal affairs officer who had just arrived on scene. The growing crowd of onlookers had their phones out, live-streaming the scene. Michelle could hear snippets of their conversations. "Isn't that the civil rights lawyer? She's the one who won the Thompson case last year. Someone finally caught them in the act." Their presence added another layer of documentation to the incident, and Michelle knew social media would soon be buzzing with the story. Back at her office, the lights blazed through the windows into the dark night as her legal team assembled. Despite the late hour, they arrived quickly, their faces showing a mix of concern and determination. The conference room soon filled with the sound of rapid typing and focused discussions as they began building their case. "The dashboard camera footage is crystal clear," noted her colleague and friend Lisa, reviewing the videos on her laptop. "And the phone recording caught everything he said. His body camera should have recorded it all too, if it was turned on." Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she began drafting the initial legal documents. Michelle winced slightly as the department's medical examiner documented her injury. "The bruising is already visible," the examiner noted, photographing her shoulder. "And you say this happened during a routine traffic stop?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implied meaning. They all knew this was far from routine. It was exactly the kind of incident they'd been working to prevent. Outside the office windows, the city lights twinkled through the remnants of rain, a stark contrast to the intense focus within. Police representatives came and went, taking statements and collecting evidence. Michelle's phone buzzed constantly with messages from community leaders and other attorneys, all offering support and resources. "They've placed him on administrative leave," announced Thomas, another member of her legal team, hanging up his phone. "And the chief wants to meet with you tomorrow morning." He paused, looking at Michelle with concern. "Are you sure you're up for this? It's different when it's personal." Michelle stood by the window, looking out at the city she'd spent years fighting to improve. "That's exactly why I have to do this," she replied, her voice firm. "How many others has he treated this way who didn't have the resources to fight back? Who didn't have cameras recording? Who didn't know their rights?" The office printer hummed as it produced copy after copy of the official complaint. Each page represented another step toward accountability, another piece of evidence that would help ensure this incident wouldn't be swept under the rug like so many others. "Social media is blowing up," Lisa reported, scrolling through her phone. "The witnesses' videos are already trending. People are organizing a rally for tomorrow." She looked up at Michelle. "This could be the catalyst we've been waiting for." Michelle nodded, remembering all the clients who had sat in this very office, sharing similar stories but lacking the evidence to prove them. "Then we need to make it count," she said, turning back to her team. "Let's make sure every detail is documented, every procedure is followed, every I is dotted, and every T is crossed. This isn't just about me anymore." The night stretched on as they worked, fueled by coffee and purpose. Each team member knew they were part of something bigger than a single incident. This case had the potential to create real change in police procedures, to set new precedents for accountability, and to give hope to countless others who had faced similar situations. As the first hints of dawn began to color the sky, Michelle looked around at her dedicated team. The next few days would be challenging, but she knew they were ready. This wasn't just another case. This was an opportunity to transform a moment of injustice into a movement for change. The morning sun streamed through the police chief's office windows as Michelle and her legal team sat across from him. Dark circles under their eyes revealed their sleepless night, but their determination remained unwavering. The chief, a veteran officer with 30 years of service, looked troubled as he reviewed the video evidence on his computer screen. "This isn't just about one traffic stop," Michelle explained, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. "Our investigation has uncovered 17 similar complaints against Officer Wilson in the past year alone." She placed a thick folder on his desk, each page representing someone who hadn't had the means or evidence to fight back. The chief's face grew increasingly concerned as he flipped through the documents. Why haven't these reached my desk before? He asked, though the answer hung unspoken in the air. The system had failed these people, burying their complaints beneath layers of bureaucracy and silence. Outside the building, a peaceful gathering was growing. Community members held signs demanding accountability, their voices carrying up to the 10th floor office. Local news vans lined the street, their cameras capturing the growing crowd. This wasn't just another protest. This was a community standing up and saying enough. We're filing a civil rights lawsuit, Lisa announced, sliding the official paperwork across the desk. But more importantly, we're proposing a complete overhaul of your department's training and accountability systems. She opened her laptop, displaying a comprehensive reform proposal they'd worked on through the night. The chief leaned forward, his expression shifting from concern to interest as he reviewed their proposals. Mandatory bias training, civilian oversight committees, body camera requirements, and transparent complaint procedures, all the changes they'd been pushing for years were laid out in detail. This could be a turning point, Michelle added, wincing slightly as she adjusted her still sore shoulder. We can work together to prevent these incidents, rather than just reacting to them after the fact. Her words carried the weight of every client she'd represented, every story she'd heard, every injustice she'd fought against. Back at her office, Michelle's team expanded as other civil rights attorneys joined their effort. The conference room became a command center, with lawyers and paralegals working tirelessly to build their case. Photos and documents covered the walls, each piece telling part of a larger story of systemic issues that needed addressing. "Look at this," called out Thomas, waving a stack of papers. 5 years of traffic stop data showing clear patterns of racial profiling. The statistics painted a damning picture, one that couldn't be explained away or ignored. Each number represented someone's story, someone's experience of injustice. Phone calls poured in from across the country, other attorneys sharing similar cases, community leaders offering support, and media outlets seeking interviews. What had started as one incident was growing into a movement for change that resonated far beyond their city limits. The district attorney's office called, requesting a meeting to discuss criminal charges against Officer Wilson. Michelle knew this was rare. Police officers rarely faced criminal prosecution for misconduct. But the evidence was overwhelming, and public pressure was mounting. "They're offering a deal," Lisa announced, hanging up her phone. "Department-wide reforms in exchange for focusing on civil rather than criminal charges." The room fell silent as everyone turned to Michelle. This was the kind of decision that could affect countless future cases. Michelle stood by the window, watching more supporters gather outside. She thought about her clients, past and present, who had faced similar situations without the benefit of video evidence or legal expertise. She thought about Officer Wilson's other victims, whose complaints had been ignored or dismissed. "No deals," she said finally, turning to face her team. "We push for both criminal charges and civil reforms. This isn't about making a point, it's about creating real, lasting change." Her words energized the room, reminding everyone why they had chosen this field of law. As evening approached, Michelle reviewed the day's progress with her team. The lawsuit was filed, evidence was secured, and support was growing. But more importantly, they were seeing signs of genuine willingness to change within the police department itself. Several officers had come forward privately, sharing their own concerns about training and accountability. "Tomorrow, we take this to the police commission," Michelle announced, her voice tired but determined. "We show them everything, not just my case, but all the others. We make them understand that this isn't about one incident or one officer. This is about fixing a broken system." The office slowly emptied as night fell, but the work continued. This case had become more than a legal battle. It was a chance to transform a moment of injustice into a catalyst for systemic change. And Michelle, despite her exhaustion and pain, was ready to lead that fight. The community center buzzed with energy as people filled every available seat. 1 week had passed since the incident, and what started as a single traffic stop had grown into a powerful movement for change. Michelle stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces, students, teachers, business owners, and countless others who had come together to demand reform. "My story is not unique," she began, her voice carrying through the packed room. "What makes it different is that I had the means to fight back. but how many others have faced similar treatment without cameras recording, without legal knowledge, without the resources to stand up for their rights. The room fell silent, her words striking a chord with many who had experienced similar encounters. An elderly gentleman slowly stood up, his voice shaking with emotion. 30 years I've lived in this city, he said, and for 30 years, I've been teaching my grandchildren how to act around police. Keep your hands visible, don't make sudden movements, say yes sir and no sir. But maybe now we can teach them something different. Maybe now we can teach them about justice. Local business owners had joined the cause, displaying posters in their windows supporting police reform. The city's largest employers had issued statements backing the proposed changes, recognizing that a safer, more equitable community benefited everyone. Even retired police officers had started speaking out, sharing their own experiences and suggestions for improvement. The media coverage had grown beyond local news. National networks picked up the story, not just focusing on the incident itself, but on the constructive response from the community. Instead of angry protests, they found organized meetings, professional presentations, and a united community working toward positive change. Look at this, Lisa said, showing Michelle her tablet during a break. Social media was flooded with similar stories from across the country. People were sharing their own experiences, but also their hopes for change. The hashtag #StandDudeForJustice was trending nationally, accompanied by videos of community meetings and police reform discussions from other cities. A young police academy cadet approached Michelle after the meeting. "Your case made me question everything," she admitted, "but it also showed me how we can do better. That's why I want to be an officer, to help make these changes from the inside." Her words reflected a growing sentiment among newer officers who saw this as an opportunity for positive transformation. The police chief had become an unexpected ally. After reviewing all the evidence and historical complaints, he recognized the need for fundamental changes. "We can't ignore these problems anymore," he announced at a press conference. "Our department needs to rebuild trust with our community, and that starts with accountability and transparency." Local schools had begun incorporating discussions about civil rights and community policing into their curricula. Teachers reported students asking thoughtful questions about justice, equality, and the role of law enforcement in society. The conversation was extending beyond the current case to address deeper issues of systemic change. Michelle's legal team had set up a helpline for others to report similar experiences. The phone rang constantly, each call revealing patterns that needed addressing. But unlike before, these stories weren't being ignored. Each complaint was documented, investigated, and added to the growing body of evidence supporting the need for reform. Community leaders from neighboring cities began reaching out, wanting to learn from what was happening. They saw how this movement was different, how it focused on constructive solutions rather than just pointing out problems. Weekly meetings were established to share ideas and strategies for implementing similar changes in their own communities. The local police union, initially defensive, began showing signs of openness to change. "We want to be part of the solution," their representative stated during a town hall meeting. "Many of our officers have been asking for better training and clearer guidelines for years. Maybe now is the time to make those changes happen." As the sun set on another day of meetings and presentations, Michelle sat in her office reviewing the progress they'd made. The wall that had once held case files now displayed community action plans, training proposals, and letters of support from organizations across the city. Each document represented another step toward real, lasting change. "You know what's different about this?" Lisa asked, bringing in yet another stack of supporter signatures. "People aren't just angry, they're hopeful. They see a path forward." She was right. The energy in the community wasn't just about protesting what was wrong. It was about working together to make things right. The evening news played quietly in the background, showing footage of that day's community meeting. The reporter's voice highlighted how this case had become a model for constructive community action. In a time when many cities are torn apart by similar incidents, the reporter noted, "This community is coming together to create meaningful change." 6 months had passed since that rainy night when a routine traffic stop changed everything. The courthouse steps were crowded as Michelle and her legal team emerged from the final hearing. The morning sun caught the gold letters on the building behind them, spelling out "Justice for All," words that now carried new meaning for their community. "The court's decision is final," Michelle announced to the waiting crowd. "Officer Wilson has been permanently removed from the force and will face criminal charges." But her voice grew stronger as she continued. "More importantly, the department has agreed to implement all proposed reforms. This isn't just about one officer, it's about changing the entire system." The changes were already visible throughout the city. New training programs had been implemented, with community members directly involved in teaching officers about cultural awareness and bias recognition. Body cameras were now mandatory, and a civilian oversight committee had been established to review complaints independently. Inside the police academy, fresh recruits watched the dashboard camera footage from that night as part of their training. "This is what not to do," their instructor explained, "but more importantly, this is why we're changing how we work." The lesson wasn't about fear or blame, it was about understanding and improvement. The community helpline Michelle's team had established continued operating, now funded by the city itself. It had become a model for other cities, showing how communities and police departments could work together to address problems before they escalated. The phone operators weren't just collecting complaints, they were helping build bridges. "Remember that young cadet who spoke to us at the community center?" Lisa asked, showing Michelle a newspaper article. The cadet had graduated top of her class and was now leading workshops on community-oriented policing. Her success story was inspiring other young people to consider law enforcement as a way to make positive change. The police chief stood at a podium across town, addressing a national conference on law enforcement reform. "6 months ago, our department was a warning story," he admitted. "Today, we're becoming a model for change. It's not easy and we're not perfect, but we're proving that real reform is possible when communities and police work together." Statistics were beginning to show the impact. Complaints against officers had dropped significantly. More importantly, community satisfaction with police interactions had improved dramatically. Traffic stops were being handled more professionally, with clear protocols and accountability measures in place. Michelle's legal foundation, created from the settlement money she received, was helping other victims of police misconduct. But it wasn't just about fighting cases, it was about preventing them. The foundation sponsored youth programs, police community dialogue sessions, and legal education workshops. Local businesses that had supported the reform movement were seeing benefits too. The city felt more united, with improved relationships between law enforcement and all communities. Shop owners reported feeling safer, not because of increased police presence, but because of better understanding and communication. In the police department's lobby, a new wall displayed photographs of officers participating in community events, reading to elementary school students, playing basketball with teenagers, attending neighborhood meetings. These weren't just photo ops, they were signs of a genuine culture shift taking root. "You know what's most remarkable?" Thomas observed during a team meeting. "Other cities are calling us for advice. They want to know how we made these changes work." The team had compiled their experiences into a comprehensive reform guide, sharing their blueprint for change with departments across the country. Michelle stood at her office window, watching the sunset paint the city skyline in warm colors. On her desk sat a letter from that elderly gentleman who had spoken at the community center. "My grandchildren asked me something new yesterday," he wrote. "Instead of asking how to stay safe around police, they asked how to become officers who make a difference." The evening news played clips from body cameras showing positive interactions between officers and citizens. These weren't staged events, they were everyday examples of the new normal. Officers taking time to explain procedures, showing respect, and treating everyone with dignity. As Michelle packed up for the day, she paused to look at the framed photo on her wall, a group shot from the first graduation of officers who had completed the new training program. Among them were faces from every part of their diverse community, all committed to the same goal of protecting and serving with respect and understanding. "We're not done," she told her team as they gathered for their weekly meeting. "But we've shown that change is possible when people stand up for what's right." Around the table, heads nodded in agreement. They all knew that lasting change wasn't about quick fixes or temporary solutions. It was about continuing to work together, day by day, to build the kind of community everyone deserved.